You are watching the World 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bawa. Let's take you through the top stories you need to know. Party leaders in the UK are reinforcing their core messages to voters as they prepare to enter the last full day of general election campaigning. Meanwhile, a Reform UK candidate has suspended her campaign and defected to the Conservatives because the vast majority of her fellow candidates, she says, are racist, misogynistic and bigoted. Starting today, individuals seeking Australian student visas must apply from outside the country. Australia has also more than doubled the fee for international student visas to curb migration. External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar has reached Astana in Kazakhstan to lead the Indian delegation at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Council of Heads of State in place of Prime Minister Modi. Denmark is poised to become the first country to tax farmers for the greenhouse gas emissions from their livestock in an effort to combat climate change by targeting one of its top sources, methane. Hurricane Beryl weakened slightly into a Category 4 storm from the monster Category 5 it became overnight as it pushed farther into the Caribbean Sea towards Jamaica, triggering warnings and advisories across Haiti, the Dominican Republic and the Cayman Islands. Well, our big focus, External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar has touched down in Kazakhstan to lead the Indian delegation at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Council of Heads of State in place of Prime Minister Modi today and tomorrow. Now, leaders of other countries in the Eurasian group, newly expanded to include Belarus this year, included Russian President Vladimir Putin, Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. They will actually be hosted by the Kazakh president at the summit. Chinese President Xi Jinping, meanwhile, landed in Astana for a state visit and bilateral meetings ahead of the SCO, while Iran's president may not be able to attend this summit as their country is in the middle of elections. Now, while Mr. Modi may still address the Eurasian grouping virtually, his decision to drop out of the summit in Kazakhstan will avoid awkward moments from sharing the stage with the Chinese president, the Pakistan Prime Minister, given the tense ties with both countries. But Mr. Modi is due to meet the Russian president next week in Moscow for a bilateral visit over the 8th and 9th of July. However, the absence could disappoint the Central Asian leadership, given that Mr. Modi's planned engagements with them have been cancelled twice in recent years, actually. Once, when they were invited to India for Republic Day back in 2022, that visit was actually cancelled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And then when India turned the SCO summit in July 2023 into a virtual format. Given that the next SCO heads of government meet is due to be held in Pakistan later this year, and the next SCO summit will be hosted by China in 2025, it remains to be seen whether Mr. Modi will attend future SCO events as well. Meanwhile, to the UK now, where the Labour Party's lead over the governing Conservatives narrowed in an opinion poll published on Tuesday, just 2 days before Britain's general election. But Keir Starmer's centre-left party remains on course for a comfortable victory. Redfield and Wilton actually surveyed about 20,000 people between the 28th of June and the 2nd of July. Their poll showed the Conservatives up 3 percentage points on 22%, while Labour dipped 1 percentage point to 41%, and Labour's lead dropped below 20 percentage points for the first time since the 10th of March, as per the pollster. The right-wing Reform UK party, meanwhile, fell 2 percentage points to 16%. Parties are now making their final campaign pitches, and party leaders have been touring the UK to reinforce their key messages with just a day to go to polls. The race to 10 Downing Street is closing in, with the UK heading to the ballots on Thursday. Opinion polls continue to indicate that the Labour Party will put an end to a 14-year era of Tory rule. Conservatives face what polls are calling electoral extinction.
The Conservative campaign got off to a pretty inauspicious start with that rain-soaked announcement by Sunak, and it hasn't really taken off.
As per the latest polls, the Labour Party is leading by 20 points over the Conservative Party after an election campaign fully dedicated to the promises of bringing about change towards the current social and political climate of the nation. Meanwhile, Reform UK's Nigel Farage's surprise entry into the polls has further hurt the Conservatives.
This is an election dominated by the cost of living crisis, which has seen mortgage rates soar, the prices for food and energy spike, and has left millions of people in the UK struggling to pay their bills.
Despite their undefeated streak elected into power, the Conservatives have faced major issues including the struggling NHS, high rates of immigration and fair shares of scandals, which has marked the Conservative rule as a time of a sluggish economy, declining public services and plenty of failed promises.
Everywhere people seem to look, they find a country that's not really working at the moment, and that's why we just have to turn the page on this failed 14 years of Conservative government so we can start putting some of those things right.
After 5 Prime Ministers and a Brexit, the UK seems to be ready for a change. While Labour's manifesto has promised wide-ranging changes in economic and immigration policies, experts have indicated that no wave of radical change is expected under Labour's Keir Starmer, with the public split on what Starmer can offer them. With Samia Afsar, Parmeshwar Bawa for NDTV.
Under the forecast by independent experts, the tax burden under a future Labour government is forecast to rise to the highest level in our nation's history. So if people are worried about, as you say, if people are, you've brought up the tax burden, if the tax burden is a question at this election, independent forecasts show that under Labour it will rise to the highest level in our country's history.
What is your solution to the energy cost of living crisis?
We will set up Great British Energy. This is a publicly owned energy company that will ensure that we have renewable energy which is cheaper, so bills will be down permanently.
Meanwhile, as you know, India and the UK have also been working towards clinching a pact to enhance the £38.1 billion bilateral trading partnership. But with India's phased general election, followed by Britain's now, the negotiations remain stalled in the 14th round of negotiations. Senior fellow from the Centre for Strategic and International Studies, Jayant Krishna, joins us to discuss the future course of the FTA now. Thank you so much for joining us, Jayant. The Labour Party has been focused on highlighting how they stand ready to get the FTA over the line after the Tories missed that Diwali deadline in 2022. Many Diwalis have come and gone without a trade deal with the UK, and too many businesses have been left waiting. But do you think India can realistically expect an FTA under the Labour Party if Keir Starmer takes over number 10?
So, yeah, it's a valid question. I mean, if you look at the history of Labour Party's relationship with India, historically, they have not been as friendly to India, and especially for India's business. Many say that they've been closer to the opposition party, Congress. And if you look at last few years, the kind of utterances the Labour leaders have made for human rights violations or minority issues in India, I think that is the background. But, if you study the Labour manifesto or what Keir Starmer, who's stated to be the Prime Minister after Labour wins, what he has said, and also the Labour shadow Foreign Minister, David Lammy, what they have said, they've talked about a new strategic relationship with India, I think, and the free trade agreement, is an integral part of it. And cooperations in many areas have been talked about in the manifesto of the Labour Party itself, which includes technology, education, security, climate action, and so on and so forth. So I have every reason to believe that, the fate of FTA, where we have had almost 13 rounds of negotiations in the last couple of years, and I was also involved personally, when I was the Group CEO of UK India Business Council. We had helped the government, for at least 3 of the, areas, the food and drinks, the technology and health and pharmaceuticals. So I think it is very important that, one is that the Commerce Minister of India and the Secretary of State at that level meetings have happened, 13 rounds have happened. And even at the Prime Ministerial level, there have been discussions when the British Prime Minister had come to India during G20 or recently when the Indian Prime Minister went to Italy for G7. So I think it is getting discussed, and I don't see it getting derailed with the Labour government coming in. There are some irritants which are still there. For example, India has been asking for a greater access for Indians in UK. The movement, the mobility issues, especially for technology sector and the healthcare sector, India has been asking for it. It also has been asking as a part of the FTA negotiations, the market access for goods.
Yes.
Many of Indian goods going to UK at zero tax. And if you look at UK, they have been expecting cut in duties, import duties, especially on products like Scotch whiskey, electric vehicles, lamb meat, chocolates, confectionery items, and so on and so forth. So these are the irritants. But with the change stance of Labour Party, which is there by virtue of
There is
utterances
reason
of
to be
top
hopeful.
leaders and the manifesto. I'm hopeful that it will not get derailed and it will get closed. It's a matter of just few months after they take power, assuming that they would win. FTA would be concluded because a lot of good spade work has already happened.
Yes. Well, Labour's manifesto, as you have highlighted, clearly says that they are keen on a new strategic partnership with India in areas like security, tech, education, as well as climate change. Well, we are hopeful. Let's see what the results over tomorrow night and day after bring. Thank you so much, Jayant Krishna, for making time for us on the World 24/7.
Pleasure.
Meanwhile, joining us from London at the moment, Dean Russell, Conservative MP and former Minister under Boris Johnson. Thank you so much, Mr. Russell, for making time for us on NDTV. Currently, most polls show Conservatives trailing in the upcoming elections and headed towards electoral extinction. Rishi Sunak has also stated that only Conservatives can form strong opposition to the Labour. Are the Tories still hopeful? Are you crossing your fingers that the polls turn out to be wrong?
Well, I think, the polls have been very negative for a long time now, but what I'm hearing on the doorstep is much more positive. People in Watford, which is the area I've been representing as an MP for the past 4 years, are very positive on the doorstep. They know about the work that I've been doing to secure the funding for a new hospital through to opening a new police station. So I think what really part of this election is going to come down to is two things. One is local experience and what people are seeing from their local MP, what difference they've made, and also reminding people that if they vote for example, the Reform Party, they're not going to get Reform, they're going to get Labour. And I think that's resonating on the doorstep. So there is a worry that if the polls were correct, there could be this massive supermajority, which is a really dangerous thing for the country.
Right.
But also I think what I'm hearing now is people are beginning to wake up to that, and they know a vote for Reform is ultimately a vote for Keir Starmer in number 10. And that's something that anyone who backs Reform knows that they inherently don't want. So I think the polls will turn out ultimately, I hope to be wrong, but we have to remind voters of what the risk is at stake.
But amid rising public dissatisfaction and voter apathy, Reform UK is predicted to chip away at the Conservatives' vote share. We hear many have been calling for a merger with Reform UK. Do the Tories want to avoid dealing with the hassle of the optics of a merger with someone like Nigel Farage?
Well, I think Reform voters are being missold in many ways. They're being told that Reform can suddenly form this huge party in Parliament and that they'll be the party of opposition or will make a big difference. The truth of the matter, and this is borne out with looking at the detail of this, is that they won't be able to do that. What they will be able to do is help Labour get a massive majority or a super majority here in the UK. And the problem with that is that not only will they diminish the voice of the right of the UK, diminish their own voice, massively diminish the Conservative voice, but ultimately what they will do is put Labour in power potentially for decades. And that is a massive concern.
Also, Mr. Russell, immigration has been a key issue this poll season for your party. UK's migrant boat crossings just hit a 19-month high last month. This at a time when Rishi Sunak has been pushing for the Rwanda scheme and Stop the Ports plan. Many consider that these government policies, spearheaded by your party, has failed to make an impact. Would you agree?
Well, it is. I would counter that point with great respect, because actually it is working. We've seen a third of the numbers come down over a period of time. We've had really great success with countries where, with one country, have had 90% reduction, and so there's a lot of work that's going on. But it's not just about Rwanda. It's about the Rwanda scheme is part of that. Part of it is tackling the serious organised crime gangs. Part of it is about having very specific return schemes with individual countries, and we've seen that can be successful. So it's a multifaceted approach. But I think the challenge is that when the reality of the truth of it actually is that when people think that it's a failure, they're going to try even more to come over. And so we need to keep sending the message of the successes that we're getting. We've put laws through in Parliament that have made sure that we've got things in the right place to stop this happening.
Well, thank you so much, Dean Russell, for joining us. Here's wishing you the best of luck for D-Day. Let's switch our attention now to Australia. If you are planning to apply for an Australian student visa, you'll now need to submit your application from abroad instead of from within Australia. Australia has also more than doubled the fee for international student visas from 710 Australian dollars to 1,600 Australian dollars in order to curb migration, with the move expected to impact Indians who make up the second largest group of foreign students. Starting today, the 1st of July, individuals seeking Australian student visas must apply from outside the country. Under the new regulation, visitors, temporary graduate visa holders, as well as other specified visa holders currently in Australia are not eligible to apply for student visas. However, student visa applications submitted within Australia before the 1st of July 2024 will proceed without being affected by these new rules. Additionally, holders of working holiday maker and work and holiday visas are exempt from these changes, and their current visa statuses will remain unchanged. We have with us licensed immigration advisor Aditya Bhati for further clarity. Thank you so much for joining us, Aditya. Now, these reforms include significantly shorter post-study work rights, a decrease in the age eligibility from 50 to 35 years, and stricter English language proficiency requirements. The visa fee has also been hiked, in fact doubled. Are these changes likely to discourage Indian students from applying to Australia now?
To some extent, because at the end of the day, money matters, and the message, the overall message is coming out as a negative message saying, we want to cap students, we want to reduce the number of students that are coming in, we want to not make it very easy for them to be able to stay back and settle there. Yes, definitely that will lead to some sort of a decrease in the interest of students wanting to study in Australia. That's definitely likely, and I think that is what the sector is worried about, whether it is the universities, the agents, or the aspiring students.
Right. While India remains the second largest source country for international student enrollments in Australia, you're an immigration advisor, you're the expert. What are some alternates for good higher education and value for money? Any up-and-coming destinations that one may not be aware of as a student from India?
See, the preference has always been the English-speaking countries. So US has been doing amazingly well. Canada, New Zealand, Australia they have all always taken students, and when one of these countries go down, the other four typically pick up the bulk of the rush that was going here. And of course, now newer destinations from Europe, like Germany, are coming in. Ireland is picking up. So there are other countries that will always get some students, but typically, if you look at past history, a student who was potentially considering Australia may now consider New Zealand, or may even consider possibly US or UK or Canada. Typically, within these five, that's how the students rotate. But if they were to look at other options, Germany is becoming quite popular. Ireland is gaining popularity. So these are some destinations that are other alternatives.
But would you say the US and the UK and Canada still remain the top choices for students heading for higher education from India?
it keeps changing every 3 months with the policies that come in and what the government announces. Right now, US is definitely drawing a lot of incidents for sure. UK was drawing, and then they announced some policies which were not, should I say, friendly towards this married students. So that's taken away some interest, and that is where a lot of students are choosing New Zealand as a destination to study. So it keeps changing. Some capping has been brought in Canada, so there's a bit of a dip of numbers in Canada right now, but I expect that to rise up because when students compare the overall scenario and the processes, Canada is still way more easier and attractive compared to a lot of other countries.
Well, thank you so much, Aditya Bharti, for joining us with clarity on the matter. With that, let's turn our attention now to Denmark, to the world's first emissions tax that is going after gassy cattle. Denmark is set to impose the world's first emissions tax on livestock beginning in 2030, targeting greenhouse gases emitted by the country's cows, pigs and sheep. But what exactly is their plan? Well, farmers would pay about $43 per metric ton of carbon dioxide equivalent produced by their livestock. That rate would increase to about $108 in 2035. The levies would be partially offset by a 60% tax deduction, rendering them closer to $17 per metric ton in 2030 and $43 in 2035 as per the Danish government. They unveiled this proposed bill this week. But why is this plan crucial for the Danish government? It's because officials project that the tax would cut the country's emissions by about 1.8 million metric tons, that's about 2 million tons, of carbon dioxide equivalent in 2030. By the way, according to the MIT Climate Portal, humans actually emitted more than 40 billion tons of carbon dioxide in 2022. Livestock is responsible for about 32% of human-caused methane emissions, according to the United Nations. The 1.5 billion cattle around the world are the cause of most livestock-borne methane. This is what the organization has confirmed, although Denmark had less than 0.1% of them, according to the 2022 figures that were compiled by iWorld in data. Proceeds from Denmark's proposed tax will be returned to the industry to support its green transition. This is what the government says, with the handling of proceeds to be revisited in 2032. The bill also includes the establishment of more than 6 lakh acres of new forest areas, among other initiatives. And the tax is aimed at slashing emissions of methane that the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says must be reduced by 40 to 50% by 2030 in order to cap global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius this century. The deal between the centre-right government and representatives of groups including farmers, the industry and unions was actually reached after farmers across Europe for months have been protesting cuts to subsidies and new regulations, some of them designed to reduce climate-changing emissions. But the proposal was hailed by the Danish government as a way to meet its domestic climate target of lowering greenhouse gas emissions by 70% from 1990 levels by 2030. You know, a similar bill to Denmark's was actually under consideration by the previous centre-left government of New Zealand, where the agricultural sector is responsible for half of its emissions, largely caused by methane emitted from livestock when they burp. But that plan was axed. It was axed this month by the country's new centre-right government, partly because of pushback from cattle farmers.